I start on whatever day it was at Castle Wine in Green Park, and I arrive correctly in suits because we all wore suits and ties those days, and I get given a blue toolbox. And I say to Jeff, what's this? He said, no, it's your merchandising kit. So I said, no, I'm really confused. So I open it, there's a staple gun and a cutter, Artline 70 Cokies. And it was at that point I realized, oh, my socks, I've made a massive mistake.
Today I'm joined by Greg Holtman, CEO of Flare Beverages, one of the oldest beer importers in South Africa. Greg started importing Windhoek beer around 1987 and worked with the Nambrew brands for more than 20 years before they ended up with Brandhouse. Greg now imports Erdinger, Paulaner, Bitburg and Royal Dutch beers. Listen out for this interesting part of South African beer history. My name is Holger Meier and this is Beer World.
Holger, I think it began in 1987, 88. I was working for the then Castle Wine, a proud South African company, which is really sad. Another one bites the dust. Really sad to see. And it's actually quite an amazing story. And then it shoots myself in the foot like 4 times. But that's just how it is. So I was playing a little bit of rugby and I kept arriving late for the games. And my coach, a chap by the name of Jeff Salt, said to me, what do you do? I said, I work for a living. I work for Woolworths. I'm on the floor as management. I'm trying to climb my way up the Woolworths ladder. So I said, but what do you do? I said, well, I'm in retail management. I'm a floor manager, and I'd like to get into merchandising. So Jeff says to me, but we've got a merchandising job opening at Castle Wine. And I'd never heard of Castle Wine before. I said, but who's Castle Wine? So he says Rembrandt and all this stuff. And I think, my word, that's actually a big company. I disappear. I go do a little bit of homework on it, and I understand, wow, there's some like seriously big brands like Klipdrift and Viceroy and Cellar Cask and the Bergholder wine range and Fleur de Cup and gee whiskers. So I go for an official interview and and I floor them with my magnificence about turnover per meter and profit per cube and proportionate layout and display. And I can see these oaks don't know what I'm talking about. And I think, man, I'm onto a good thing here. I'm going to tell them about merchandising, etc. So merchandising in Woolworths terms means a head office job. You don't work 6.5 days a week, and you decide what style of fashion, which colors, which sizes go into which stores. It's actually quite an interesting setup. So lo and behold, I get a call from Jeff. Like a day later, says, no, you've got the job, and here's the starting salary, and you get a car. And then the car was nice. I hadn't had a car at Woolworths. I had to take a slight knock in salary, but it really was slight. But I've got an expense account, and I've got a driver. And, man, I hand in my notice, and I do the exit interviews. And I start on whatever day it was at Castle Wine in Green Park, and I arrive correctly in suits because we all wore suits and ties those days. And I get given a blue toolbox. And I say to Jeff, what's this? He said, no, it's your merchandising kit. So I said, no, I'm really confused. So I open it, there's a staple gun and a cutter, Artline 70 Cokies. And it was at that point I realized, oh, my socks, I've made a massive mistake. Anyway, it was a great mistake. And, I worked with industry legends like Colin Blows and Jeff Salt and Harry Lubenstein, Ronnie Zeeman, Trevor Kidd. I mean, yes, here was this newbie. I was dark green behind the ears, man. And so that's how I got into the liquor industry, actually, completely by fluke. So I was working at the industry at the time, and I got approached by the then Southwest breweries, and said, don't you want to come and work for us? And I was very quick to say, listen, hold on. I made this mistake once in my life. I'm not going to leave an industry giant to go to you guys. You guys really are nowhere. And the then marketing or sales director, Ernst Ender, then, I had a let's call it a chat to him, Kleinmond. He's still to this day has a place in Kleinmond. And he said to me, but resolution, I think it's 435 is coming through, and Southwest Africa is going to become independent. We're going to become Namibia, and we believe it politically astute not to own operations in an apartheid regime country like South Africa. Therefore, we will have a management buyout. Now, my whole life, I've dreamt of, working for myself, doing various side hustles back in the day, making a blasted barbecue sauce for braais and selling it to oaks in the liquor industry with the kind of knowledge of the boys involved. So I thought, going into it, and myself and Terry Kutsia, then I started working for Terry as his, call it, sales rep. And about a year and a little bit later, we sat down with Nambrew, had the negotiation, and bought out Windhoek Beer Cape Town, or Windhoek Beer. Actually, the company was called Windhoek Beer Cape Town, even though we were the old Cape province, so East London. But in the very early days, all we did was Cape Town, and understanding the draft market and the little dumpy bottle with that white label and the kind of green writing on it. And those early days, if I wanted to have 20 posters, I'd have to write a 4-page proposal to Ernst explaining to him what I want to do with 20 posters. Those oaks were beyond tight, I promise you. And, my first mission when I started the company, I had a yellow dust cloth. And my mission was, no one's going to buy a case of beer or a 6-pack with dust on it. And that literally was my main job, was to get into the trade and dust off the beer and try and lift it to where people could see it, And we started, I think, I'm speaking under correction, Holger, but we were like doing 700 hectoliter for a year, 800 hectoliter for the year. All right, so a short while into the business, Terry and I had different philosophies and visions for the company, and, it was kind of, well, I'm leaving. And he said, well, if you're leaving, I'm leaving. And I said, well, in that case, I'll make you an offer, which he accepted. And then I took over the company, about 3 months after its inception, and bought two yellow rags and frantically, started dusting off beer, land sakes. And, it was really interesting in those days, Holger, bank managers, the then old Trust Bank, I was banking with Trust Bank, and they had my surety, that of my wife, my dogs, they had my underpants, they had everything. And in fact, the manager, a chap by the name of Bud Becker, awesome guy, he gave me 3 overdrafts because I couldn't survive on one. And if he had to give me a bigger overdraft, he'd have to go to head office, and he knew they were going to disprove it. So he literally backed me, and one day I will never forget this. He phones me in a panic. He says, Engelsman, I'm going to get a head office inspection. Can't you please just close down one of the overdrafts? Yes, and I had like 87 Rand petty cash, which I banked. He phoned me, he said, man, stop playing games with me. My job's on the line. And I then went to Mike Kavensky of Aroma. They were still quite big players. And I remember Mike used to talk financial stuff to me, which was like so far over my head, but every now and then I'd nod, like pretend I understand what I'm doing. So I had a meeting with Mike and I said, Mike, listen, this is the situation. So, well, you know what, if you give me a discount, I'll pay you earlier, which I did. I gave him a little discount and he paid me earlier, and I killed the overdraft. And actually, from there onward, we flourished. So I kind of owe Mike a big one. He did help myself and put out of the drag there, and 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 that's how we started. Holger, I bought a Lansing Bagnall forklift, the electric thing from Nambrew. All it had was an hour's worth of life in the battery. So I'd load the truck at night when I came back from doing my rounds. Maria Erasmus was my, call it, general manager, doing everything, and she'd have put up, the load sheets, who's going where, in what truck, and I'd come back at night and load the beer with this Lansing Bagnall and hope like hell I could get it all done in an hour. So those were great days. I wouldn't swap them for anything. I never knew if I was going to be in business from one month to the next, but we made it, and the brand started getting a bit of traction. The urban legend of Brandhouse, the non-hangover beer, started growing. People started believing it, and about 6-7 years into the business, the traction was there, and we were probably doing about 18,000 hectoliter. And I was standing in a bar. I will never forget this. In just off Green Market Square in Cape Town, there used to be a lovely little outlet there called the Tudor Inn, a German run. The owner was Martin Diebold, and I was having a chat to Martin and standing there with no drink because I still had to work. And this complete stranger came up next to me and he ordered a vintage draft, and I thought, fuck, that's awesome. You get a lack of feeling when that happens, And the guy saw me looking at the beer, and he turned around to me and said, "You know what? You should drink this beer because it doesn't give you a bubble-us." And that rumor kind of came back, 360. And I must tell you, I thought, what, bugger that. I'm actually going to have a beer. Those days we did that. We kind of had 3 or 4 beers and drove home. Still had a couple of beers and drove home. And it was just awesome that all that hard work and all the the messages that myself and the Red Force and whoever else, punted out there all the time, came 360. And the company just grew, we grew and grew and grew until I think when the now defunct Brandhouse took over, we were at 197,000 hectoliter, which is actually a hell of a journey. We took it from that 800, it took us 19 or 20 years. And it's just, for me, it was very sad about how the company ended. That was never meant to be a brand house. It was always meant to be a Windhoek Beer South Africa. And there were grandiose plans, which Pete Hoyer will know of. He was involved with them. But yeah, business politics, I think, is far stronger than I suppose, personal relationships. And yeah, they took the call to go with Beck's, and then Guinness anyway had to buy them out. So I suppose from that perspective, they did well. They made good money. But yeah, now that dream is done. It's no more. And yeah, we kind of like 2 junkyard dogs growled at each other, and we ended up doing the walls and wheels for the Heineken side of the Brandhouse contract. And then those guys wanted to exit the contract early, and there was another fight. And out of that fight came Flare Beverages was that. And then, then a very painful experience, the NMK experience. My ex-Namibian Breweries colleagues, Andre Herman and Rob Bender and Pete Hoyer, had actually kind of bought the company. And one of the Gilby's guys, I think it was Podcha Steyn, was supposed to run Cape Town, and he pulled out at the last moment. And then they approached me and said, would I be interested? And the first meeting I attended with the guys as a consultant, because I was still negotiating with Brandhouse, turned out to be with C&C, who were doing Frangelica and Tullamore Dew. And the guy said to us, okay, we're taking the contract away from you. And they went like a whole chunk of the business out the door, and they got up and left, and we sat and looked at each other. And then we did the deal, with KWV, with old Dr. Barnard, awesome guy, absolute scholar and a gentleman. What a pleasure to do business with that guy. He had a very strong ethical and moral compass, good guy to work with. And then KWV bought half of NMK with the intent of putting all their stuff as a route to market instead of being, spread all over to everyone. But then somehow something happened, which I don't know, and he took a very early retirement to be replaced by Case Locher, who was a bit of a henchman. He had a very different opinion, very different approach to the business. And after a short period of time, we parted ways, and the offer was, I learned something. We had a Texas auction, which I didn't know, what's a Texas auction? And they said, well, we'll put a price for your 50%, and you put a price for, and whoever's the bigger price buys it out. So I thought this was quite a dangerous game to play. I mean, wow, we're playing for big stakes here. Anyway, long story short, they wanted to pay us X for our 50%, but were only prepared to give us X minus for our, So it just didn't make sense. And then we took the company back, and that was 2008. Great timing. I mean, so we really went from one storm into an absolute perfect storm. And we went to the bank and said, look, we now need to increase our overdraft because we don't have our big partner. And they said, we're a bank, we don't lend money. And the inevitable liquidation followed. I still to this day maintain that company should never have gone down. It was a great company, had awesome brands. And there I was, myself, Pete Hoyer, a lot of the NMK stock was sitting in my warehouse in a bond store that I had. And Pete said to me, what are we going to do? I said, no, Pete, I've had enough. I'm done. This is a very, very, very incredibly painful experience, both financially and emotionally. And I'm done. And he said, no, don't do that. Let's start out of the ashes and we build up. You do Cape Town and we anyway. That's what we did. And Erdinger and then Craig McKenzie got involved. I forget that. Craig actually said, no, guys, it was Craig. It wasn't Peter, it was Craig. Craig said, he'll run Joburg, Pete runs Durban, and I run Cape Town, which we duly did. And then Erdinger came to me and said, don't you want to take on the brands? And we said, yes. And then the brands were imported into Craig. And then as it happens, we kind of, I think, all agreed to separate out of that loose arrangement and go our separate ways. So we started importing Erdinger directly and supplying Pete with some of the stuff. And then Hilton took over from Peter, and Peter retired. And I think Hilton formed Beverage Emporium. Beverage Emporium. And I'm really chuffed. I think he's doing very well. Look, he's a smart guy. Hilton's a good operator. He knows what he's doing. He's been on the floor. He's sold. He's done everything. So I'm no doubt that he will go from strength to strength, which is awesome. And, we went our own way. We started up Joburg, and then we went into Durban, and then we went into Durban again. And now we're back in Durban again. And in fact, we've just appointed Martin Princeton as the director of the company. He's done a sterling job for us in Joburg. And and here we end up, again, mainly in a beer portfolio with Erdinger, Paulaner, Bitburg, Royal Dutch. And it's not as much fun as it used to be. I think, unfortunately, a lot of margin has gone out the business. I think when all the independent mama papa stores disappeared from the liquor scene, your Shoprite Checkers and Pick and Pay and those boys, they just said, thanks, we'll have it. And it's very difficult to do business, and the big boys use those retailers as kind of a barrier to entry. And the margin is gone, because you've got to pay a rebate, and if you're in the central warehouse, you've got to pay the central warehousing. And so it's still fun, but it's not as much fun as it used to be, Holger, back in the days when you were selling gazillions of Bavaria up in Cape. It's just not that much fun anymore.
Yeah, what was it like when you started? Were there in those days already a lot of Namibians in Cape Town, or?
No, Holger, it was, I think University of Stellenbosch probably had the highest concentration of Namibians, and there was probably anywhere between maybe 500 or 1,000 Namibian students. So clearly Stellenbosch was a bit of a lighthouse for us. But I do genuinely think that what helped was it was great quality beer. And on top of that, there was really only one other beer in the market, and that was SA something. I can't remember the name. SA Brothers, SA Brewery, something like that.
Olsen's.
yeah. And they had 99.9% of the market, and I think we had 0.0001. And slowly but surely, the yellow dust cloth dust cloth and trying to speak to guys like Darren Swirsky, who he said to me, but Greg, I sell like so many beers, and Mike Kavensky, those boys. And eventually I said to Mike one day, but Mike, you're selling so many cases of Windhoek, so many cases of SAB, and you're making so little money. It's a commodity. If you sell 10 cases of Windhoek at the margin you're selling it at, you have to sell like 112 cases of SAB to bank the same amount of money. Now, Mike, being a sharp guy, he quickly picked that up. And, from there, he kind of passed on, give these guys a little bit of love. And Rebel Holdings, which was Gilbers at the time, an absolute legend down here. I've lost complete contact with him. Steve Black was running Somerset West, also German kind of orientated community town. And one Christmas, I smoked Steve's cook to take in 34 pallets of Windhoek lager. Obviously, he got the best. And about an hour after the truck had stopped, I get a frantic call from his area manager, Piet, and Piet phones me and says, "Here, Engelsman, what have you done?" So the only thing I could say to keep the beer in, I said, anything that's not sold by the 24th of December, I'll take back. Well, I tell you what, by the 20th of December, they were placing another order.
Wow.
So, what I basically did, SAB had no space to put in beer. So if you wanted a case of beer, and Rebel Somerset West was a big store, it was like a mega store in those days. If you wanted a beer, you had a Windhoek lager. And of course, old Steve Black was a big advocate. So, he just talked it up to anyone and everyone. And in those days, if your bottle store manager said it's a great beer, then you believed him. So those days, bottle store managers could still tell you the difference between a Pinotage and a Merlot and a Cab and a Lager and a Pilsner and a stout and a chocolate stout and a triple and a double and a blonde. But today, unfortunately, those guys are gone. They lost to the trade, and that knowledge has gone with them. So we deal with the big boys, and the fun and the fun of the little guys are gone. It's just not there.
So Cape Town to me always seemed like it was very well organized, and there were groups controlling the market. Who were the big players? So it was Rebel. It was with Darren Swirsky.
Aroma with Mike Kavensky, and then. Well, no, it wasn't Darren with Rebel. It was Rob Naismith with Rebel. And then Darren and Brian McIntyre and a few of the boys broke away. They were working for Joey and Sam Burke at the Drop-In Group, which was another very big player. Those guys broke away and bought the Picardi Group from Jan Picard. And I will never forget the headlines. I think it's still up in Darren's office. Black Day for Drop-In, and you don't cross Sam Burke. He was not the easiest of oaks to deal with. In fact, he made nails look weak. And they broke away and they formed Picardi, which then went on to buy out Rebel as well. And then they listed the main Canadian there. All I can see his face in front of me. I'm getting old, Holger. I forget his name. Jacques Kempen. He then listed the Rebhold Group, and they listed and then they delisted years later. But they and still to this day they're a force. They're a big force, but their business has changed, and they've changed with it. They understood that you either have to be massive destination stores like Hillcrest Tops, that's a destination store, or like an Ultra. Greenpoint, it's a destination store, or you've got to be tremendously convenient, which are your local tops, so what they did is they're supplying the majority of the market and doing well at it. So, I'm glad to see they still around us in independent, but all the other boys, the Drop-Ins have gone, the Diamonds, Mike and Peter Sternberg have gone. They got taken up by Fruit and Veg. So, Aroma is long gone. I think Mike kept 1 or 2 Aroma stores to supply his son's restaurants. But they all gone now. The independents now really are the tops, because at least those guys can still take a decision and list a certain amount of what they want to list. They don't have to wait for head office approval. For the rest of it, it's all gone into Pick and Pay and Top Out Checkers. And of course, Macro has always been around, and Macro is still around today.
And Namibia in those days, Namibian Brewery, was it still a family-run business, or what was it set up?
Very much. Early days, we dealt with Old Man List, Mr. Carl Werner List. Awesome guy to deal with. If you were going slightly left of center, he'd give you that devil stare, and you'd quickly back off. Even though I would always push the envelope, he gave me that stare. I disappeared quickly. Very quickly back to my side of the line. Great guy to deal with. Him and his wife. They are both late, but awesome people. Also Namibians. They really had a thing for Namibia, that they wanted to make the country a better place, not the company. Surely they wanted to make their company big and successful and sustainable. And, Holger, the truth be told, I think that Windhoek to this day is the only brand that stood up against the might of SAB and survived and flourished. No one else had managed it before that. And that's what mattered. You had the good old days of Dimitri Garafopoulos in Joburg, with his tough love with his reps. But he ran a magnificent ship, and he punched way above his weight division, and at the long end of a short day, we took on SAB, which is no easy feat. And kind of at the end, when the final bell rang, we a little bit like Rocky 20, we were there still standing battered and bruised, but we had won a fight.
Yeah.
So, that's awesome. And I mustn't also forget the characters like George Naidu with his Midmar liquors. And it would be remiss of me not to mention Butch Vagan also. If you understood and knew Butch, and Butch was a very, very good retailer, he intimately understood the relationship between percentage and rands banked and turnover and your proportionate turnover and turnover per meter. He fully understood that, coming from a retail background. Great independent guys to deal with, Those were the guys you could go in, and after an hour's meeting, the guy would say, okay, I commit to take a truckload of beer. Butch had also a massive destination store. And years later, when I was no longer involved in beer, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but SAB phoned me up and said, Jesus, come and have a chat to us. We'd love to buy you a cup of coffee and buy you a lunch. And we want to know how you managed to do all it was actually very interesting listening to their perspective from their side. We had a few of those actually, and the first one arrived, and there was a whole lot of oaks there, and they were all like high level oaks. I said, no, I'm taking a takeaway, and I'm going sitting with you oaks. But it was because we were entrepreneurially driven and not corporately governed, I suppose is the word I'm looking for, so we would typically have a strategy for the southern suburbs for UCT and the rugby clubs, and we'd have a different strategy for the northern suburbs for the Boerewors belt and those type of rugby clubs or cricket clubs. And Stellenbosch was a completely different strategy again. And how are they controlling this shit? How they, anyway, a lot of fun. Those were the days. Those are the days when you could sit with a George Naidu and send in, I don't know how many rigs into his stores. And you would agree to a price, and the price would stay. And you'd sit with Butch or Mike Kavensky, and what was agreed happened. You didn't have to have 12-page rebate confidential agreements and growth targets and everything else and buying gondola ends and buying shelf facings. And shame, eventually the reps became, I think, auditors, counting the shelves. I'll never forget, went on a store visit, and there was a guy, and I watched this for 10 minutes, and eventually my curiosity got the better of me, and I went to him and I said, I don't want to mention the company's name, and I went to him and I said, but what are you doing? He said, no, I've got to count all the shelf facings to achieve my KPIs and KPAs. I said, no, expand that. He said, well, if I lose a shelf facing there, but I gain 2 here, it's okay. But I lose one there and I lose one there, my KPAs fall in this outlet. So I said, but when do you sell? When do you have to? No. So we've got planograms, and if there's so many shelf facings there, then the sales will be this, which is 100% right. If you can't see it, you can't buy it. But I just thought, wow, how do you sell? How do you build a relationship? Sell yourself, sell your brands. Gone. You become little animated robots, Count it. So many shelf facings.
Yeah.
This is stock. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a different world, eh?
Yeah, very much.
Did you also have draft in those days? Was it the full portfolio?
Yeah, we did. Back in the days, we had ice boxes. I don't know if you remember those things where you had a cold plate and you piled ice on it, and after about 4 years running my own company, I delisted my telephone number because I would get a call at 11:45 at night, and it was Martin Diebold who had been sampling a tremendous amount of our products, phoning me to tell me the beer is not working. I need to find what would happen. As the beer flows through the cold plate, there's a gap that happens between the cold plate and the ice. It's like a bridge. The ice forms a bridge. So the ice is not in direct contact with the cold plate. And then you say to Martin, crunch the ice down. Goodness gracious. Crunches no, it's working. Thanks very much. And in those days, I kind of worked from can't see to can't see, I'd leave it in dark and come back in the dark. So that little bit of sleep that I had, or the lots of sleep I had during the night, was important, Or someone would phone and say, the beer's not working. And you get it. It's a big client. You get in your car and you drive through and you find out the keg's empty.
Yeah.
and then I learned tremendously from SAB. I really did. I learned huge amounts from them. I respected them and feared them as well, make no mistake. Then they bought out the electronic coolers, where you had the ice bank. And of course, now I had to explain this to Namibian breweries that this is the route we had to go. And when they saw the price of these things, man, I've never seen Oaks go into reverse gear quicker than that. Anyway, we went on and we did a few of our own, and then they saw, the success of the new technology, and then it was adapted. So draft was a very important part to us. Holger, we all know that you putt for dough in the on-con. You build a brand and you build a brand loyalty. And it going into, I will never forget singing, dancing Irish jigs when we took those ice plates out, because they were painful to work with. Yeah. They were not great, especially if you're pouring high volume. They didn't work effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I always found that when we started with Bavaria, I think SAB hated draft. And they actually changed to that little 12.5 liter keggy system, which was a complete disaster. But it opened up the market for us, so we could convert all the underbar fridges that had been pouring Castle Draft faithfully for 10 years. We could convert into Bavaria taps. And I'm sure you also learned those tricks.
Yeah, no, for sure. You remind me, I'd forgotten the era of the underbar fridge. And the challenges with the underbar fridge, that as the beer gets colder, it absorbs the CO2 more readily. Oh, and then the guy doesn't have a backup keg that's cold, and then he puts, draft, much about draft. And you don't want to loop in the line, and then you get the guy that's watching his costings very carefully, and you come and service a tap. You back in those days, you do what you have to do. It's servicing a tap. The guy, he's standing there with a mug and he's measuring all the mugs out. I don't want to mention names, but there was one guy had like 7 mugs of foam, and he said to me, say a beer was at that stage $20. He said, you owe me $140. And like I stopped and I looked at him, I said, what for? He said, but there's 7 mugs of beer you expect me to throw away. Now, customer's always king, but the king's not always right though. Now you got to explain to this very delicately. Well, let's wait for half an hour and we see how much beer we really are. And by the way, if you actually carefully weigh this keg, there's about 51 liters. Another urban myth. Forgive me. 50 and a half liters or 51 liters of beer in there. And kind of got away with it I kind of got away with it like that. So, the little white lies we told. And, at the end of half an hour, there was maybe a half a beer. And I said to the guy, do you really want 10 Rand? Standing with my hand in my pocket, making out to pay. And he said, no, thanks for explaining that to me. I appreciate it.
And did you guys have to do a lot of events? Were the beer fests and stuff?
Yeah, Holger, we for again getting back to the first couple of big ones we did was the Stellenbosch Marti Carnival, which was arranged by the German students, and they would have this traditional German get together at Van der Stal, and it would be a Friday night and a Saturday, and then a fruit shopping on a Sunday morning. And after those 3 days, I had to cut my liver in half and freeze the other half because it had grown so big. In fact, the doctor said to me I should start smoking to make room for my liver. It was so we did those sort of events, and then we started doing more and more and more events. And if you ever wanted the wind to blow in Cape Town, you must just let us put up a tent. That Southeaster came at us with a vengeance, but we did lots of events, Holger. I forget how many over the years. But we did huge events, we did Hamilton Sevens rugby, we did Maynard Carnivals, again with the German club of Cape Town. Erich was the guy's name. We sold over a weekend, I think our record was just under 300 kegs, 50-liter Windhoek draft. It was, only that I could arrange efficiency and everything. A great oak to deal with. It was either right or it wasn't. And you know what? The sales were huge. I mean, think about that. We're going back, 30 years ago to Maynardville, 300 kegs on a Friday and a Saturday and a Sunday afternoon. And then we had to be there Sunday afternoon to collect the empties and break down the park because Monday morning it had to be a park again. So, yeah. Events.
Yeah, those are massive, massive numbers. I mean, nobody will get those anymore.
No. Just not anymore. No.
Yeah.
No.
Greg, and now over the years, the brands that you've worked with, you've done obviously the Windhoek range. I know you have a special place for Tafel, and then I think Beck's and Holsten. What were the other brands that crossed your floor? Well,
I must tell you, Beck's was a great beer. Look, all the beers we handled, in my opinion, were great beers. But I did have a very special spot for Tafel. I thought that it should be groomed to be the crown prince to take over from Windhoek, because brands have a lifespan, and you know what? There's nothing wrong with grooming a crown prince. And at one stage in the Cape, in the Cape, Old Cape province, through our depots, we were running about 77,000 hectoliter or 75,000 hectoliter of Tafel alone. And that was massive. If you look today, I think Heineken has just announced they're culling Tafel, if I'm not mistaken. So, I'm very sad to see that happen. I remember the Tafel that I drank when I started used to come from the Swakopmund brewery. Mr. Emil Horschneider was the owner and MD of that brewery. Also, absolute scholar and a gentleman, great guy. And in fact, the very first time I got there, they were still doing Hansa Pilsner, but they were only allowed to do it in Namibia. Also, great beer. And Holsten, for me, Klaus von Müller was the marketing director for Holsten. Awesome guy, a wonderful guy to deal with. I think in a lot of the ways that he took Nambrew out of, and I mean this respectfully, kind of out of the dark ages and introduced them to electronic media and advertising. And in fact, it's not a good thing to say that, oh, look, I've saved R1 million in my marketing budget. It's rather, I've blown the whole marketing budget, but look how much volume I've achieved by blowing the marketing budget. Therefore, I want to double my marketing budget to continue the sales trend. And I won't go into detail, but those were actually words uttered at meetings. I mean, I just said to where are we going to, So Klaus von Müller was kind of a shining light, the pun on the Holsten Knight protecting the purity. I don't know if you remember that ad with the little Holsten Knight fighting all the rubbish that was going into beer, and here's the purity. So that was for us, it was like a milestone to see one of the beers that we were selling actually on TV. It was fantastic. Chuck Miller also, great guy. He was a very good marketing guy, understood strategy, he understood what was necessary, but working in a system that, you're working in a population of 1.6 million people, and you are a god in that 1.6 million people, coming down to South Africa where you're not. It was very difficult for him to, I think, bridge those philosophical differences. Eventually we did get that Dragonfly ad, the Dragonfly, the Pure Beer and the Pure Beer Society, and that just reinforced and retrenched everything that was already happening in the market. So yeah, and the rest, as they say, is history. I have no idea where the hectoliter sits, but I'm sure it's well over 1 million and a half by now. I'm not sure what Heineken's intent is with it. It'll be interesting to watch, but I do see that will be coming in as more of a low prop brand to defend the Crown Prince, and that's smart strategy from Heineken. You let everyone fight down below, and that's where the fight is happening. And you make sure that your king is well looked after and its positioning maintains where it is.
Yeah, it is sad to see all the delistings, and people have been asking for Camelthorn. I know you were closely involved with the launch of Camelthorn. I don't know if that's been discontinued. But certainly Tafel, I think even in KZN, it made nice inroads.
Yeah, look, Holger, what they unfortunately did with Tafel was inevitable. They sold it too cheaply. I mean, you could buy 24 by 500 ml cans of Tafel for 200 Rand. I mean, that's like, and Tafel was great beer. It's really it's a thirsty beer. Just it's a great beer to drink. It's a sessionable beer. It had everything going for it. But I think what they were doing is to put it in a position where it didn't make profitable sense to continue with the brand. And anyway, they now own everything, and they've got Windhoek Lager to play that role, and Windhoek Draft. Back in the day when we were handling the Windhoek range, they were premium brands, and people were prepared to spend the premium on the brand to buy the beer. And that's a market perception that's created. But if you lower the price of that brand, you do also lower the brand integrity. You lower the brand. If I was a marketing guy now, I'd come up with brand voltage and all that cut. But you just lower the brand appeal, and it's true that you need to price a premium at a certain price to maintain the premiumness. And we all know that the difference between a beer at a premium price and a beer at a non-premium price is the brand equity. And if you keep lowering the price, or you keep the price at a proprietary level price, guess what? It won't be a premium anymore, and people won't buy it as a premium.
Yeah. I was at our local Liberty Liquors on Friday night, and I asked them where the Tafel was, and they said there's no Tafel, and they said there's also no Lion. So clearly those two were fighting a fight, and if the one disappeared, there's no use for the other one.
Yeah. And you know what? You're going to sell so many more hectoliter of a beer at a more profitable price. And it makes sense. I understand it. I get it. Still, for me personally, very sad to see Tafel go.
Greg, let's talk a little bit about the beers that you currently import and maybe their stories. I mean, my favorite is obviously the Erdinger, but I had a good session on the Bitburger at Ziggy's in Salt Rock the other day.
Look, Erdinger sells in 74 countries globally. It's the biggest wheat beer in the world, or world's number one wheat beer. It's not big in Munich because it falls just outside the Munich circle.
Yeah.
But it's big in Germany. It's also, if you look at how some of the other competitors brew their beer, Erdinger have this secondary fermentation in bottle, which is absolutely fascinating, Holger. Just before getting capped or crowned or whatever, they put in a little bit of wort with just the right amount of yeast, and then they do a bottle fermentation for 6 weeks in those massive climate-controlled cellars that they have. And really, honestly, that's what makes Erdinger, that depth of flavor, the richness of that beer. You can actually taste it when you open it. Another beer had a brilliant slogan: "It's only expensive until you try it," and that's very true for Erdinger. Once you drink an Erdinger, you understand why it is. It's also my favorite beer, just by the way. People tell me it's not sessionable. Well, shit, I've never come across that. Maybe I'm just a bad influence. But yeah, look, I suppose I've got Nambrew brews to thank that I like German beers. They are quality beers, they are brewed Reinheitsgebot and a lot of pride. I think a lot of pride goes into German beers, which I think maybe the rest of the countries around maybe don't have that same sense of pride that goes into those productions. I must tell you, for me, it's whilst I say Erdinger is my favorite beer, for me, if it's so difficult if there's an Erdinger on tap and a Bitburg on tap. It's so difficult for me to make a choice that it actually almost comes down to what I'm eating. If I'm eating something, I'll go with a Bitburg. If I'm eating something, I'll go with the Erdinger. They're both great beers, and thank goodness they're very, very different. One's a Pilsner and one's a Hefeweiss. So yeah. And
the Erdinger is still a family business.
Yes, it's still owned by Mr. Werner Brombach. I don't see that changing in the near future. I really don't. Awesome people to deal with, family-type owned brewery. It's a big business, make no mistake. You say family and you think small. Not in this case. It's a big business. Awesome people to work with. Through COVID, they were, if I could have got to Mr. Brombach, I might have given him a kiss, but in fact, all our suppliers were fantastic to work through with COVID. They all understood it. And I think it was a global thing. I think everyone helped everyone. I'm no exception. I think I got helped along with everyone else. So, yeah, it was really nice. And, yeah, Erdinger, very much a family business.
Now, tell me about the Oktoberfest at the brewery at Erdinger. Because that's slightly different. It's the same sort of time. I've been to the Munich Fest a few times.
Holger, it's called the Erdinger. It's called the Herbstfest. Okay.
Okay.
It's like an Oktoberfest, except it's. I want to put it this way: it's smaller and classier. When I say smaller, 15,000 people in the tent. It's not small by any stretch of the imagination. Copious quantities of beer, similar menu, and a smaller version of the Oktoberfest in München, But surely the only brand on sale is the Erdinger. And then there is a little champagne den where if you're really feeling bad and you want to make sure you die the next day, you go into after a whole night of beer.
And is it open to the public or is it for the trade?
No, the Erdinger Herbfest is open for the public and everyone can go or anyone can go. And it's awesome. It's wonderful to sit in that environment where, I think 99% of the people have had more than an elegant sufficiency, but it's friendly. Gemütlichkeit, I think, is a great German beer, which you can explain better than I can. And if someone bumps into you, he's immediately apologetic. He's not trying to smash you on the head with a glass, a la SA style. I'm going to stop going to those dives, I think. But yeah, no, awesome place. Great festival. In fact, worth going to for a classier Oktoberfest.
Yeah.
But it's I think they do it first week of September. First week, I think they run it for like a week.
Okay.
Early September, yeah.
We went to the Oktoberfest in Munich because they ran the Oktoberfest Sevens, so the seven-a-side rugby tournament for the first time in 2017. And that's the last time I went to Munich. So we had the excuse of going to the rugby, supporting the Springboks and the German and the seven-a-side rugby team, and then obviously enjoying a few beers on the Wiesn.
Oh, awesome, man. Al, I'm sorry, I must look out for that. Just give me a heads up next time that happens. I'm there.
So in your portfolio now, you've got Erdinger, you've got Paulaner, Bitburger.
Yes, Bitburger, and we have Royal Dutch. We exploring some other options, Holger, which I can't go into now. From a beer perspective, we've had some very promising discussions. But, I've kind of learned my lessons now. Just because I like a beer and it drinks awesomely well, it doesn't work. You have to have a partnership with the brewery you're looking to bring on, and you do a 1 year, 3 year kind of process with them, and you co-commit and you co-spend on it. And unless that happens, there's no point. There's no point. I don't own those brands. Why would I commit my heart and soul to it? Did that once and learned that lesson.
Greg, talk us through the rest of your portfolio.
Sure. So we handle a brand called Tomatin or Tomatin. They're the world's largest single malt distillery. And I don't want to go into detail, but a lot of the big brands out there have a portion of Tomatin malt in it. So we're handling their legacy. Unfortunately, that had a massive increase from supplier. We do the legacy, the 12-year-old, the 14-year-old, the 18-year-old, and as the SKUs go up, our biggest challenge is actually to get stock on time all the time. Unfortunately, we suck at that one. We haven't got it right. We've been out of stock too often. We're working hard to try and rectify it. And we've just been appointed officially about 6 months ago, the Kamiki range of whiskies, Japanese whiskies. Hugely interesting how they make whiskey. I mean, you talk about German pride in their beer. Well, the Japanese take it to another level for their whiskies. We were up against some quite big companies for this brand. And, hopefully we won't run out of stock of that thing, because the biggest problem, we used to do a bit of Nicker with old Hector Macbeth. But the biggest problem was just being in stock all the time. Then stock was allocated, then they didn't. And Suntory are not interested in supplying this market directly, even though they have bought their own company and they're doing their beers that they don't want to bring in there. So the Nicker comes in kind of haphazardly at best. So hopefully with the Kamiki range, we won't need to do that. And we priced slightly better, I think, than the Kamiki, than the Nicker range, because we're dealing directly with source, not through a whole lot of various people. Then we have a very interesting liqueur range, the Caper, global brand, globally awarded gold medals all over the place. And they've got also a Dutch company. They've got a very interesting take on it. They sell a liter for about the same price as a local 750 ml. So it offers tremendous value for money. But they had a massive logistics issue in as much as they couldn't get glass, they couldn't fill. They had liquid, but they had no bottle. So we've literally just landed the containers now, and it'll be going into market. And then we've got a brand we've had for like 12 years, Uzo Batari. Holger, we do nothing to it. We just put it on the price list, and yet every year it just ticks up. It's not a drink I drink out of choice. It's I suppose it's an acquired taste. I haven't acquired it yet. And then we also do a beer called Royal Dutch, from United Dutch Breweries. Very interesting company. They've got a plethora of brands. And actually, it's a nice beer. We do the little 250 ml. It comes in at a reasonable price. And Macro are doing quite a good job for us.
And your distribution now goes through Liquor Runners?
Yeah, Liquor Runners handle all our walls and wheels now, and I should have probably taken that call a while ago.
And then you've got your teams in Joburg and
Durban, Joburg, and Cape Town. We have teams. We have outsourced sales efforts in the outlying areas.
Well, Greg, thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing your decades of knowledge with us. And I look forward to catching up with you when I'm in Cape Town next time.
Absolutely. Let's have a cold something somewhere. And take care of yourself, Holger. Take care.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for listening to our stories here online. In the show notes, you will also find a link where you can subscribe to become part of our community and be notified when we upload our latest content.